This is Reimagine the Contact Center. I'm Marc Bernstein, and today I'm interviewing Isaiah Granet, founder and CEO at Bland AI. Bland was the first AI voice agent that I had heard of, the first ones using LLMs and generative AI instead of the traditional dialogue flow approach. And the really cool thing about them is they've actually advanced their approach where they kind of have a hybrid, where you have LLMs as the core and then dialogue flows to kind of keep the AI agent within the proper guide rails. This conversation was super fun. It was aspirational and futuristic, and also grounded in the real experiences that customers want today when they're talking to a voice agent. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. This is Isaiah Granet, founder and CEO at Bland AI. Isaiah, hey, great to see you.
Great to see you too, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really good. I'll be honest. This is maybe the interview I've been most excited about for many months. I know it took us a while to actually get this set up. And you guys, Bland, you were the first voice AI agent that was actually using Gen AI that I had heard of. And I remember getting a text message from a friend of ours who was like, "Hey, have you heard of this company?" And I remember clicking it, and I think the use case at the time was the AI ordering a pizza, or you would order a pizza from it. And I was like, man, this space is going to be huge. And that was before OpenAI was doing this. That was before, other folks were, putting their own voice AI agents in. So props to you guys on your timing. You are in what I think is one of the most exciting spaces you can possibly be in AI right now.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very humbling to hear. We are still very young and have a long ways to go, but we got really lucky that we timed out in the space when we started building our product Bland, right kind of when LLMs were hitting their stride well enough that you could productionalize them, and a little bit before everybody else had gotten there. And it gave us this just awesome head start where we got a chance to really build and spend a lot of time with a lot of people from different backgrounds. We weren't focused on a certain vertical because everybody was kind of just trying us out, seeing what was happening, and it gave us a ton to learn from.
So I'd love to hear the founding story. How did you guys decide to come up with this plan to do this thing?
Oh, that's a great question. It has a longer answer than it deserves. So we actually were a health tech company 2 years ago when we first incorporated. So we were doing something totally different. We were helping doctors' offices fight against insurance claims. It was a really bad idea, like really, really bad. We got into YC with that though, which was an interesting experience. And we got like halfway into YC, and we just realized this thing isn't going to work. People don't want the product we're building. And that's kind of a crushing realization when that happens. And so we said, all right, it's time to go back to the drawing board. And we were listing off every possible idea. I mean, like tech for veterinarians to like concussion software, and kind of smack dab in the middle was, some of the doctors that we had been working with were asking about, well, could I have AI call insurance for me? I was like, it's probably not like infeasible to do. And so I sat down over a weekend and I hacked together a prototype, and it was horrible. I mean, it was like 5-second latency, but it was kind of one of the first iterations of anybody ever hooking up. I think it was a GPT 3.5 to like a text to speech engine. And I was hooked since then. And we were like, this is amazing. People aren't talking about this enough. This is going to be huge. And just because it has 5 seconds of latency today does not mean that it will have 5 seconds of latency, a few years from now. That's what we thought the time horizon was going to be. And we kind of put our heads down, me and my co-founder. We said, we're going to build like an AI Twilio, a really developer focused solution for AI phone calls. So anybody could just give us a task and a voice and a few other parameters, and we'll send out an AI phone call, which is the AI doing the full conversation back and forth, all the way through. We tried to sell that to everybody in our batch. Everyone said no. We ended up going all the way through demo day, which is like the big YC event where you present your, company for investment, with no traction. We got rejected by 170-ish investors over the course of 3 weeks, and walked out of demo day with basically no funding. And so we were kind of sitting there going, wow, that was head spinning. We thought we had this really cool technology that we could see the future. And we had investors sitting and looking at us and going, no, people aren't going to make phone calls a year from now. And we were like, really? Like, yeah, no, we don't think that phone or voice will be an interface people will use. It'll all be text-based and through LLMs. And this was like seriously the number one rejection that we heard was that phone calls wouldn't exist a year from 2023 fall. Uh, and from there, we kind of put our heads down. We said, all right, we're going to really lock in on this idea of building out AI phone agents, but we're going to kind of move away from the developer perspective. And we're actually going to focus on selling directly to some of the larger enterprises and say, well, how do we give them AI phone agents that drive real value? Not just the tools to build them, but actually deliver the end product for them to a degree. And we kind of just started working on saying like, all right, how do we get the latency lower? How do we get it lower? Just anything we can do to make the AI reply quicker. And we had a big breakthrough in January of last year, I guess, 2024. And we managed to build something called Bland Turbo. That was the world's fastest voice AI. So it was 400 milliseconds round trip end to end, which was beating the other fastest AI in the world at the time, which was 3 seconds, also built by us. And people were blown away. I think that might have been the demo you actually saw, Mark. I'm not sure when you got the link sent, but it was like lightning fast, very dumb, not ready for production. But we had a ton of businesses that were really excited to use it. And so we started working with a lot of really interesting companies on the smaller side. We ended up raising our seed round finally in January of this year from Upfront Ventures. And then we had this explosion in growth just as folks started adopting the technology. And along the way, the improvements in LLMs that have happened have just been so significant that we've been able to capitalize on that and build better and better tooling. And also kind of branch off and start developing our own tooling, which is where we are today. So right now, early 2025, we work with some of the world's biggest enterprises, including Hertz Rent-A-Car, Clipboard Health, University of Phoenix, bunch of other awesome names that I can't talk about quite yet. And what we deliver to them is a fully self-hosted stack to do voice AI phone calls. So end to end, we host all the infrastructure, we deploy it for them, and we help them make agents that sound incredibly human and help them deliver better customer experiences at scale.
Latency and the tonality, I think, was super powerful to let people say like, oh, as the reasoning gets better and better, and we're able to do better reasoning in these smaller, faster models, like we are 1 or 2 stone throws away from being able to have the AI voice agents that everybody dreamed of.
Exactly. Now, granted, it turns out that we did not realize exactly how much work was going to be on the back half, even after the latency, which I'm sure we'll talk about. I think there's years and years and years of work left to be done. But it was this magic moment where people actually engage differently when they think they're talking to a phone tree or a robot. So they use a different part of their brain and they will engage with the phone tree in a way that's way more mechanical. It's kind of like the difference between typing something and handwriting. It actually uses 2 separate parts of your brain. And what we noticed was that there's this flow state that you can actually get into when the latency is low enough, where people are just having a back and forth conversation. And it's not always clear if they know they're talking to an AI or not, but the conversation doesn't feel like it's with a robot. And I think that was kind of the like wow moment that we had.
That's so cool. It's almost like there's less intentionality. Like when people are speaking and people are having a conversation, you're not saying, how do I say the right 5 words for the other person to get it? You're basically using some form of filter on your real organic thoughts, and you have your real organic thoughts, and then you're trying to just put them in a little bit of a filter so it goes to the person and is respectful of the context. So you're like not cursing in a business meeting if you don't want to be doing that, or you're not cursing in front of kids or that kind of thing, but the filter is very low. And I totally
Right.
see what you're saying, that when you're talking to like a tree, a decision tree, you're like trying to select one of X options and use the exact 5 right words, so to speak, that will get you the right answer. And I don't think you do that when it's more conversational.
Exactly. And one of the actually tests that we have is how many words somebody says on a phone call. And what we've noticed is if we have a rough entry, if there's, for whatever reason, additional latency, the number of words a person will say drops dramatically. And they'll actually respond with like 1-word answers, like yes or no. That's one of the ways that we measure the quality of the calls. And one of the most interesting phenomenons that we've seen is the length of the average call goes up when we put our robot in place for companies. So people actually tend to talk longer with the AI than they would with a human.
Wow. And how do you how do you make sure that that's a good thing, right? Because it could go both ways, right? There are times where, and you hear this all the time, that, well, one of the reasons people want to talk to people is because they just want to be heard. And, we do Balto a bunch of work in the Medicare healthcare enrollment space. And, those calls run very long. And in part, a lot of seniors like to kind of weave their own stories into the call. So it's not just like, help me buy a healthcare plan, go. It's like a little bit more, fluid. So how do you guys assess the extent to which it's that, people engaging
Mhm.
with it in kind of a fluid conversational way versus people not getting their questions answered and the LLM, I thought it could do this, but it can't do that. How do you guys kind of parse out that data?
Great question. It's really difficult to do. I mean, I don't have to tell you about it, but the number of things that you have to be able to understand if a conversation is a positive or a negative is really, really difficult. The core of our product is actually something called conversational pathways. And this is what most of the enterprises we work with use. So it's a programming language that we invented that actually lets you do trees of prompts. So what it is like a fully fluid system where at each level we have a prompt that controls a certain step. And those steps have complete flexibility, but they also have these guardrails and rules of when to move on. So if you're enrolling a patient in Medicare, it might be, hey, at this step, we have to collect policy information. And what we'll do is we will keep going in the conversation, but gently redirecting it back to collecting that policy information. It's really interesting. And it's been a challenge to say, like, how do we break conversations and actions to be directed without stifling the generative AI parts? One of the things that we learned early on was like, we don't believe that you can just put a prompt in place and have reliable outcomes and results consistently for some of these phone calls. And what we've seen is just, it doesn't really work. And not just because the models aren't smart enough. There's a whole lot of challenges that come with unit tests and other things that you can't do. So what we try to do is break up the conversation while maintaining that kind of flexibility. It's interesting because we see a lot of older folks that like to kind of talk a little bit longer and they'll talk with the AI because it'll just keep engaging with them. We've had a few challenges with like, how do we politely end up and wrap up a call? But I think, it's interesting because we're so early at the cusp of this field and we're still learning and we still have a lot of really bumpy roads and rough edges. It's not like we deploy and everything's perfect. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work to be able to do these systems live in production.
It's such a good example you mentioned of how do you politely wrap up a call, because those are the sort of nuances that, like folks at Bland, I know, are like looking at every single day. And it's something that if you're not in it, you don't even really think about. But the idea of like, and now I'm kind of putting that logic tree together of like, oh, wait, so it needs to try to redirect you back to the core issue. But if you have a good reason for going to a different issue, it needs to listen to you and follow you on that. But if you
Mhm.
don't, you're kind of messing with it, it probably needs to politely confront you. And if you continuously mess with it, it needs to politely say, I'm going to end up the call. And if you continue to mess with it, then it needs to wrap up the call. Like I imagine a whole bunch of like nuance like that, when you're just talking to the AI, you don't even think about, but you guys are almost trying to take the dynamics of human conversation and like you're trying to take like social skills and train an AI to understand social skills.
Absolutely. And actually, it was a fantastic transition into like what we do like day in and day out is we are building this thing we call bland tone. And it's kind of funny because our name's bland. So whenever we put it in front of anything, it sounds a little self-deprecating. But what that means is that we found over time that there is a way that LLMs want to output text, which is this really long-winded form of like useless information. And what we focus on is training our models, fine-tuning them, adjusting the prompts to actually be really, really information dense. It's kind of the difference between saying, thank you, Mark. That information is really helpful. I'd love to collect the next piece of information. Can you tell me your, social security number? As opposed to, gotcha. And what's the social security number? And we actually spend a ton of time focusing on how do we do that really effectively. And that's one of the big differentiators that we have is we work relentlessly on getting this bland tone in every single phone call.
Is there any chance you listen to the Lex Friedman podcast with Dario, the CEO of Anthropic?
I heard bits and pieces, but I didn't listen to the full thing.
Super good. And one of the things that we're talking about is I wish I remember her name, the person who's in charge of the Claude system prompt, and what she is trying to do is develop Claude's AI personality. They got a whole bunch of feedback from their users that it was super annoying that Claude would respond to a lot of things with certainly.
Hmm.
And their model, they couldn't adjust the model and make it not do that. So you can actually go and read. It's part of the system prompt. Like, please, never under any circumstances, do not reply with certainly. Man, it's really interesting thinking about how do you take these LLMs that are just going to do what they're going to do and
Hmm.
try to put them into boxes to give the sort of responses that people like, that people actually want to interact with.
Absolutely. And it doesn't even stop there. And this is why, it's funny. I see people post on like LinkedIn, these random influencers that are like, it's the end of call centers and phone calls and like AI is taking over stuff. And I'm like, you have no idea how difficult any of these one pieces are. And it's going to take so long to get them right because when you dive in, you realize there's so much more to always be done. And like one of the examples is when people are talking, we do this thing called back channeling naturally, where we'll say, mm-hmm, uh-huh, yup. And it's these little filler phrases to let someone know to continue. Super important on the phone because you have no other cues. You don't have a visual cue. You don't have body language. You can only hear if they say mm-hmm or uh-huh. And so what we actually have done is we're building machine learning models in-house that will predict based off of your wave audio patterns, whether or not the turn is going to switch to somebody else in the call. And so what we'll do if we're low confidence that it's going to switch, i.e. be our AI's turn to speak, we'll inject a back channel. So we'll say, mm-hmm, uh-huh, yup. And so we do these little tricks and things that we have to kind of constantly be improving on to actually make the call quality really effective. And that is a whole other category of problem in itself that takes, a lot of research to even be able to get an MVP. But one of the things you'll notice about when you talk to Bland is the tone and the engagement of the conversation is materially different. And that's by design.
So does that mean that you guys have all running at once, speech to text, an LLM, and a machine learning model to inject these back channels?
Yeah, more than one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I think what kind of struck me with that is it's not one type of AI. You're like picking different AI tools. LLMs are different than machine learning models, are different than speech to text models. And I imagine you guys
Mhm.
probably have like an acoustic model to figure out tonality or pacing. And the fact that you guys aren't just like applying one, pull this from Chat GPT and tell me the answer, but you're actually stitching together all these tools. It actually makes me appreciate how like beautiful and complex the human mind is. We essentially have dozens of machine learning models running in parallel in our brains. And in order to approximate that, we have to go to this vast tool set and put together a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of that.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I mean, there's even dozens more. Like, we built a custom noise gate so we can filter out background audio chatter a little bit better to make sure that we don't accidentally pick that up. We do all of these things around like language switching. So some people will code switch languages while they're talking. Like, how do we detect the probability that they'll keep going in that language or that a word that might sound like an English word is actually a different language word? And we do these like systems that are really kind of complicated. And what it comes from is like me and the team, we will sit down like once a week, a couple times a week, and listen to a ton of call recordings. And then we'll go listen to like recordings from call centers. And we will do nothing else besides pick apart the little things that we all do intuitively and say, how could we make this part of our AI? And the reason we're doing that is because, look, we could build a really nice phone tree that will handle 100% of phone calls for a lot of use cases. And, we've seen our customers do that, but we don't want to build that as a company. What we want to deliver is better customer experiences. Our end goal is not to say, okay, well, how do we just get rid of headcount? It's actually to say, how do we make that headcount meaningful and say, how do we give better experiences, a VIP experience on every phone call? And it's not about a phone tree. It's actually about a conversation and a pleasant conversation, and one that you look forward to and enjoy. And so we do a lot around like, how do we figure out how your speech patterns prefer to be talked to? Do you want to have long pauses? Do you want a neutral tone, a happy tone? We do a ton of work just focused on the macro and then on the micro of every single call.
That's so cool. It reminds me of two things that I thought of recently. The first was Jensen Huang talking about the CEO of NVIDIA, what's your long-term strategy? He's like, we don't have a long-term strategy. We are focused on like making our product better every single day, right in front of the customers, going to the customers and delivering excellent products. The feeling of like sitting down and being there with the information. Somebody gave me this piece of advice a long time ago. I can't remember her last name. Her first name was Ashley. Shout out to Ashley. And she was a Six Sigma black belt. And
Wow.
she was talking about one of the tools that they use. And, it's this idea of the Japanese continuous improvement. And the idea is go to the Gemba. And the Gemba roughly translates to the place where it happens. And
Mm.
the idea is if you're, trying to solve a problem, so many people's bias is to solve the problem from way back here, to ask the managers what they think, to theorize what the right answer should be, to go even look at the data. But it's like, did anyone go and sit down and listen to a whole bunch of phone calls, like where it really happens? And I think that a lot of the best technologists in history have been ones that do that. Steve Jobs was obsessive about every single aspect of what the iPhone looked like and felt like. And with Mac, there was, of course, the story of the boot time, where the boot time, I believe, was like 10 seconds, to boot up your Mac, and he wanted to get it to 8 seconds. And basically calculated for everyone that those 2 seconds applied millions of times, and everyone booted up their Mac, once a day, would equate to lifetimes of human potential that are being squandered. So he went and felt and saw, I want those 2 seconds. And then that sort of detailed approach, I feel like, is one of the things that's essential to creating great technology companies.
Obviously, I'm no Steve Jobs, and I think we try to learn from the lessons of the past and say, like, for example, when we're working with a rental car company, like I had a couple of my engineers go rent cars, and they would call in, and we would go through the flow ourselves and say, it's like you were not allowed to go through a human to do this. You have to actually go through our flow and make sure that it makes sense. And we make people on the team about once a quarter build a project on top of Bland. So you have to go dog food the API. And it's just about getting close to the source, which is like all of us spend a hugely unnecessary amount of time on hold. It just doesn't make sense that it exists. And like we can be the ones to help fix that and to make it really like a better world for everybody. And I do think the idea of hold will be a thing of the past, truly, in a very, very near future. And that is something that we can contribute. And I think on top of that is similar to Apple, like what we take a lot of inspiration from is we think that there should be a definition of what a great conversation is and a great experience is. And it doesn't mean that it won't change from person to person, but we do think that there's a fundamental kind of underlying set of principles and that we want to build those and prescribe them to the end customer. And we might turn out to be totally wrong about that, but that's kind of the approach that we're taking with how we think about opinionation on that kind of Apple versus PC style.
And, so many different types of organizations throughout history have said, let's try to figure out what a great conversation is. You can even think of, Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and the whole now class of Dale Carnegie training that exists around like, what does a good human interaction look like? We
Mm-hmm.
have a bunch of the Stephen Covey books about like having like empathetic understanding, seek to understand, not to respond, or seek first to understand, then be understood.
Exactly.
There's so many of these kind of timeless principles that people have tried to put into how do you communicate effectively. And, I definitely believe that there is no one right answer, but you can probably make an overall more effective AI communicator if you find a handful of really solid principles and make sure it adheres to that. Like humans are, I would, some maybe are, some maybe aren't, but a lot of humans aren't great listeners. A lot of humans don't have the words that they want to use, and they can't remember the words. And
Yeah.
if AI doesn't have that problem, AI could be a more effective communicator than most people.
And I think one of the things that people get wrong is like, we're not out here to take jobs. I mean, like, yes, some people's jobs will be impacted by AI technology. You can't be blind to that. But what we are here to do is drive better experiences for everybody. And I think that people underestimate what that looks like. And to me, the example I always go to is I think that in 5 years from now, Bland is successful if you have a contact in your phone called like Southwesty, the helpful Southwest Airlines assistant. And you can call that contact, you can text that contact, you can interact in any sort of way you want to. And when you call, They're going to say, hey, Isaiah, hey, Mark, um, are you looking to fly to XYZ place? You go, actually, no, I'm looking to go to New York next week. And I go, okay, perfect. I saw last time you took that flight, it was the 9 p.m. Do you want to take the red eye or do you want to take a little bit earlier? What's your preference there? Probably a little bit earlier. Oh, do you want to upgrade so you board early? And no, no, that's fine. I don't want to pay that. Well, actually, you're a great customer, so we'll do that for you. And like that kind of quick back and forth interaction where you have this just really tight surface area of a brand and of a company that you can just get done quick. And maybe it won't be for every possible thing. There's a lot of really dedicated, small, high touch things that you might want to, if you're a really frequent flyer, you get a person that just knows you and it's a real human that you can communicate, you have a relationship with. But for the average person who doesn't fly that often, I think this will be a revolutionary positive experience and save them so much time and so much headache.
It makes voice a more attractive medium to use. Like if your voice experience doesn't suck and it's like, being able to hit a button and just verbalize what you want, and then that gets digested correctly and immediately turned into action, that's a superpower. That's like magic. That's like a magician who can just say something and voila, it happens. That's like everybody's dream. So maybe as we do more and more of this, voice becomes a more attractive medium.
1,000%. I think it's already starting to happen where we see preference for couples over certain chatbots. These are really small contained experiments, but we do a lot of tests to see what works the best. And I think voice is incredibly dense information wise. It's also what we evolved to use to communicate. I mean, we have it for a reason. And like, I think that you just have to look at the dictation tools, right? People actually prefer to say something than to type something a lot of times. I think we've just made it so painful to get an excellent experience out of the phone where you're getting bounced around the world. Someone who barely knows your issue, barely knows their company policies, has an average turnover of like 6 months in their call center. Of course, you don't want to get on the phone. But if it was an old friend, you would pick it up every single time.
You really would. It's the feeling when an old friend calls and you see, on call it your caller ID, or you see on your phone your contact, their name come up. You get a little bit of a warm, fuzzy feeling. And I actually really like that as like a proxy of the North Star for how it should feel to interact with the brand. Is you should try to create that little bit of warm, fuzzy feeling when you're talking to the brand. It shouldn't be like you're getting
Mhm.
bounced around the world and you're number 18th in the queue.
Exactly. And I think to hijack that point a little bit, if that's okay, is I
Yeah.
think one of the things that consumers and people need to actually think about is over the next 2 years, next 4 years, there's going to be this decision that happens. Either we are going to get old friends, and the thing that I'm describing, which is kind of what we're fighting for at Bland, or there's a very real possibility that we get phone trees 2.0, where it is a really ugly time where you have to argue with a very unhelpful AI that doesn't know you, that isn't compassionate, that is disparate from systems. And like, I don't think people realize how bad it could be on the other end of an experience. And that it's actually pretty important that we all kind of demand and say, like, the phone trees and the outsourcing of call centers and the way that we've done things and not with care and like the way that Balto helps drive better experiences on the call center level is like how people should be thinking about it always. And but there's this whole other side which is totally possible. And like we have to be really diligent to demand that these next 2 to 4 formative years we actually want these better experiences as a group of people, as consumers.
Let's go back to something that you mentioned just a minute ago that I think is really important. It's top of mind for a lot of folks, and that is the role of AI on jobs. And I take probably a little bit of a lot of people would say excessively futuristic approach, and I'm like, I really do believe it's going to take AI in general a ton of jobs. And that being said, like I think that it will bring down the cost of goods and services quite a bit. So things are going to be, much less expensive. I think people overall, on average, will work fewer hours, and we're just
Mhm.
probably not going to fill a full 40-hour work week, is my guess. But I do think, especially and I think it'll actually lead to huge abundance of goods and services and the ability to have most things like very quickly, and people will channel a lot of their energy into artistic and creative pursuits, things that just intrinsically drive them, rather than things that they do for a paycheck. I think that's like where the world ultimately will head. And I believe in the short term, call it the next 5 years, I think there will be some pretty dramatic disruption with jobs. So I'd love to hear more on your guys' perspective of that. Like, how do you square the fact that AI is getting so good and performing at human level and in some cases above human level in most domains, and that people are still going to have jobs and that's not a threat to jobs? Like, how do we square this?
That's a great and a very loaded question. I think first of all, like we at Bland are very, this is very important to us. We don't take glee in people not having jobs or impacting their jobs in any way, shape, or form. People deserve to have meaningful work and to do really, really meaningful things. I think the first point is that call centers are not the place that for a lot of people that's happening. They're generally underpaid, overworked, and not great working conditions. And what we see with Bland is an opportunity to help drive better experiences and turn those jobs into something more meaningful. And I think a great example is like, it's way harder to put these systems in place than most people think. And the reason is that AI is the greatest demoware that has ever existed. It is really easy to spin up demos that blow your mind. And we're actually great examples of that, which is like for the first release of Turbo that we did, it was a really amazing demo, but it wasn't production ready. And it's taken us a lot of work and a lot of investment and a ton of capital. I mean, tens of millions of dollars at this point to be able to get to the point where we're driving really high value. That's part of the reason why we see a lot of people that go work with small startups and then they end up kind of shifting towards us because they're like, this demo was not what I was promised. It takes a lot of work. And where I'm going with that is that I think that there will be a lot of new jobs. We're already seeing this where people are pushing for Bland certifications. They are taking over their job from being the IT telephony person or working on call center scripts to helping to prompt the AI to help make the AI really exceptional. And it's about scaling up human potential. The example I always go to is like 70% of America worked in agriculture 100 years ago. Less than 2% works in agriculture today. Nobody blames the tractor for taking jobs. And we're all a lot happier that it exists. And so I think the short answer is you shouldn't be blind to the fact that there's going to be pain and that some people will lose their jobs and some people will be really heavily impacted. But I don't believe that this is an exception to all of the other technologies that have been revolutionary, where at the end of the day, they actually drove a lot more employment, a lot better employment, and higher quality of life for everybody. And I think that's the positive end of AI. I'm willing to accept I could be wrong, but the entire history of humanity and our inventions has proven that pattern actually right.
I really appreciate that. I think often about seniors, and we have a massively aging senior population, and we're going to have a lot of young folks who are going to in some way, shape, or form have trouble competing with AI, and can't get in the workforce as, like, for example, like an entry level marketer. A lot of people can't. There will obviously be
Mhm.
some entry level marketers, but AI is going to be a great entry level marketer. So it'll be harder. The bar will be higher. So I think about like what would kind of be a great type of value creation for humankind, and it would be in like the United States, not having by default take your parents and put them in a giant senior living facility. Obviously, some of those are great, and but culturally, I think we're very quick to not give seniors the human care that they need.
Mhm.
And I think you can imagine that what opens up potentially is this beautiful exchange of knowledge and information across many generations from the new folks in the workforce that need to do something more humany, and the seniors who are now able to get a better more human experience. So I think there's gonna be a lot of opportunities like that where it's like, where is a person really important? Where do you not
Yep.
care if it's a person or a bot? Where do you not care? And then
Yeah,
where do you really care? I think the places where you really
exactly.
care, people will be gravitating toward that. So that's my hope about where we're going to see jobs go.
I think people tend to catastrophize and say like, "Oh, this is just going to take everything." It's like it's because partially a lot of people aren't on the edge enough to see where the new opportunities are coming, and there are new opportunities, and there's actually a ton of new opportunities. I mean, I have friends who are making a lot of money from websites and apps they built without coding at all, and they use Cursor. There
Wow.
are new things, happening, and I think it's just important to not catastrophize, to not paint it as black or white. And also remember, like, we have a glut of people in the US that are really highly educated that are not working highly educated jobs right now. those are people who will have an opportunity to transition into these really high skill focused jobs. I mean, fine tuning LLMs, working on some of the machine learning stuff. There is a lot to be done. I couldn't agree more with that. I think it's just like, even look at WashU. So for any of your listeners that don't know, as WashU alum, Mark is a little bit of a St. Louis legend, and you see like the levels of things that you can achieve in kind of this new world that's coming, and the things that you can build. I mean, I'm an example of it. Like, I don't know what else I'd be doing if I wasn't building an AI tech startup, right? But like, I think that there's so many opportunities, and there's so many people who are ready to grab them. And we're not talking about the fact that those are people that are misappropriated right now, doing things that are actually below their skill level.
Isaiah, that's a beautiful vision. Let's put these minds to work. Let's put these minds to work. And that's a call, I think, to, folks who feel like you're not putting your mind to work. Like, very fortunately, those opportunities are going to jump up around you, and you're going to see a lot of them. And if you just feel disillusioned or feel like, well, that's not for me, that's for someone else, then it's going to be tough. But like, kind of lean in, believe in yourself, put your mind to work. The opportunities are going to be all around you.
Exactly, exactly. I think some people will have a tough time. People did lose their jobs in factories with automation. Like, you can't be blind to that. But I do think that at the end of the day, it's a better world, and I think we'll see that. And we've been gearing up for this actually for a long time with the level of education and capability that we have in this country.
Overall, Isaiah, where do you see AI going over the next 3 years?
Great question. Um, I think it's going to be much slower than people think to actually get to where people think it's going to end up. First of all, as models get smarter, the average person, I don't believe, is seeing the impact of that additional intelligence. Most people are not using these models for PhD level work. A lot of people are just using them to write emails or like generate a lot of fun stuff. And so I think that we're overestimating and saying that there's going to be some breakthrough where there's a super intelligence. It's probably unlikely to happen in the next 3 years. What I do think is going to happen is slowly but surely, the kind of way that you saw Wi-Fi pop up in every cafe and every airplane, there will be little bits of generative AI in all of our daily lives. And some of it will be not so great, and some of it will be phenomenal. And I think that with voice AI specifically, one of the things I kind of laugh about is there's this British like kind of cult sitcom Red Dwarf that exists. And they are like these futuristic people, 3 million years in the future. And they have voice AI in every vending machine and every toaster. And they all have personalities and they talk to them. And I think bit by bit, we're going to start to see that where everything you talk to is going to have a personality and an engagement. And hopefully it's like fun and really like a positive, but we'll find out.
Isaiah, congrats on the incredible company you're building. This conversation was a blast.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. It was a pleasure and an honor to be here. And I'm a huge fan of you, and I'm a huge fan of Balto. So I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you, buddy. Take care.